The jungle was alive with sounds, some familiar, some not. Rain poured down heavily, its constant drumming on the dense canopy above barely muffled by the thick fog. Sergeant Liam Rivers stood still, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground as his eyes scanned the surroundings. He had been sent to this alien world with one mission: keep the Vulpine at bay. The Vulpine, an alien species that resembled humanoid foxes, had always been a threat to humanity. Their raids had devastated colonies, and now the humans were finally fighting back. But today, something felt different. Liam couldn't explain it, but the air felt charged with something he couldn't yet name. There had been talk of peace talks, whispers of an unexpected alliance, but after years of war, such things seemed impossible. The Vulpine had always been the enemy. There was no middle ground. It was a constant battle for survival. The Vulpine were known for their strength, their cunning, and their strange, almost mythical ability to roar, an act that could intimidate even the bravest of warriors. It wasn't just a sound. It was a weapon, a symbol of their power. And today, Liam was about to face it. He had heard rumors that the Vulpine were teaching humans to harness the same power. But Liam, a soldier in the thick of the conflict, had never thought much of it. He was too focused on surviving, too focused on fighting back. He didn't need to learn their methods. He had his own, but today, he found himself standing in front of a Vulpine warrior named Kale. She was tall, imposing, with fiery red hair that fell in thick waves around her shoulders. Her amber eyes glowed with an intensity that made Liam's pulse race, not out of fear, but curiosity. Kale had been assigned to him for a training session, and the task was simple: learn to roar. Learn to channel the energy of the Vulpine. Liam scoffed inwardly. He had always relied on his strength and combat skills, not some animalistic display of power. But something about Kale's presence made him pause. There was a calm in her demeanor, a control he hadn't expected from an enemy. "Are you ready?" Kale's voice was calm, but there was a hint of challenge in it. She seemed to know what was going through his mind. Liam nodded, unsure of what to expect. He didn't want to look weak in front of her, not after everything that had happened. But he also knew he had to try. They had been fighting for too long, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to end it. If this was the first step, he had to take it. Kale stepped back, her gaze intense as she watched him. "The Vulpine don't just roar," she said. "It's not about being loud or intimidating. It's about focus, about connecting with the power inside of you. Roaring is a release, an expression of strength, but it has to come from within." Liam felt a strange mix of frustration and curiosity building inside him. He didn't know what Kale expected, but this wasn't something he had learned in the military. There were no tactics, no strategies, just this. She placed a hand on his shoulder, surprising him with the gentleness of the touch. "Focus on the power within you. The roar is not just a sound, it's a force. Let it out." He took a deep breath, closing his eyes as Kale instructed. At first, it felt ridiculous. He had spent years in combat, yet this simple act of roaring seemed beyond him. He felt nothing but a strange emptiness. But Kale's voice cut through the silence. "You must believe in the power of your roar. It is the essence of who you are." Liam's grip tightened on his weapon. He wasn't sure if it was her words or the quiet storm of the jungle surrounding him, but something shifted in him. His breath quickened, and suddenly, the ground beneath him felt alive, pulsing with an energy he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the rain, the air, it was something deeper, something primal. Without thinking, he opened his mouth and let out a roar. At first, it was small, a hesitant attempt at mimicry. But as the sound built, it seemed to grow, echoing through the jungle like a call to arms. It wasn't just his voice. It felt like something bigger was rising inside of him. The roar reverberated off the trees, the rocks, and the very air around him. Liam's eyes snapped open. The sound felt powerful. He could feel it in his chest, in his soul. It was more than just a noise, it was a force, like Kale had said. And as he stood there, panting, the air around him thick with tension, he saw Kale's eyes widen, her face full of surprise. "You did it," she said, her voice softer than before. Liam turned to look at her, still breathing heavily. "I don't know what just happened." Kale smiled, but there was something else in her expression, something Liam couldn't quite place. "The roar isn't just a weapon, Sergeant Rivers. It's a connection. And now you've made it. The power inside of you is no longer just your own. It belongs to both of us." Liam didn't understand. There was a part of him that wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss it as just another strange alien ritual. But another part of him, deep down, deep inside, knew that this was just the beginning. The Vulpine had always been a mystery, but now, Liam had been given a glimpse of something much bigger than war. This was about power, about survival. And maybe, just maybe, it was about something more. Liam stood in silence, his heart still racing from the intensity of the roar that had just escaped him. He could feel the vibrations in his chest, as though something deep inside had awakened. The jungle around him seemed to hold its breath, the distant sounds of rain mixing with the echoes of his powerful cry. But as the air settled, the question started to flood back in. What did this all mean? What did Kale mean when she said the power was now theirs to share? Kale remained calm. As always, her amber eyes locked onto his, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was a smile that was not just about the surprise of his success. It was one that seemed to speak of understanding, of knowing that something larger was at play here. "That was impressive," Kale finally spoke, her voice a calm contrast to the storm that had just passed through the air. "Most humans can't tap into their roar so quickly." Liam blinked, still trying to process the rush of energy that had filled him moments ago. "I didn't know what to expect," he admitted, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow despite the rain. "It just felt right." Kale nodded, her expression softening. "It's not just a roar, it's a release. A connection to the strength that lies deep within. The Vulpine have always used this power in battle, but we also use it to connect with each other, to understand one another." Liam frowned, trying to comprehend what she was saying. He had spent years fighting against the Vulpine, viewing them as enemies, predators to be eliminated. Now, in front of him, stood a warrior who was showing him something completely different, something that was, in a way, more than just a physical act. It was a connection, a link between their two species. "You make it sound like this. Roar is more than just a weapon," Liam said, trying to find the right words. "Like it's a language?" Kale's gaze softened further, and she stepped closer to him. "Yes, exactly. It's a language of strength, of survival, of emotion. When we roar, we don't just show power, we show our intent. We show our will. In battle, it's a declaration. But in peace, it's an offering." Liam's mind raced, his thoughts scattered by the new and confusing information. It felt like a riddle wrapped in layers of mystery. If this was true, if this roar could be so much more, then it meant the war between humans and Vulpine was built on misunderstandings, on things neither side truly understood about the other. "What do you mean, offering?" Liam asked, still trying to catch up with the flow of conversation. Kale's eyes locked with his, as if searching for something in him. "It's about trust. We have lived in conflict for so long because we've never understood each other. You roar to intimidate, to assert dominance, but we ... We roar to share strength, to form a bond." She paused for a moment, as though weighing her next words carefully. "Maybe that's something we can teach you. Maybe that's the way forward." Liam felt a sudden pressure in his chest, as though a weight was pushing down on him. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of Kale's words, or the weight of the past few days crashing over him all at once. They had been fighting this war for so long, each side determined to win, to overpower the other. He had never thought about the war in terms of connection, of unity. But Kale was asking him to think about it differently. To see it from her perspective. A low rumble echoed through the jungle, cutting off his thoughts. It was the unmistakable sound of more Vulpine approaching. This wasn't a fight, they weren't under attack. But they were close. Very close. Liam's instincts kicked in immediately. He reached for his rifle, glancing at Kale. We need to prepare. The Vulpine aren't exactly known for giving peace offerings. Kale's eyes narrowed, her stance shifting as she readied herself. Not all of us are here to fight, Sergeant Rivers. Before he could respond, a group of Vulpine emerged from the jungle, walking confidently but without hostility. Their faces were stoic, their bodies towering and regal in the heavy rain. They carried their weapons, but their movements were relaxed. Almost as if they weren't expecting a fight. Liam tensed, ready to move into defense. But Kale raised a hand, signaling him to stand down. She stepped forward, her posture calm but assertive. Welcome, warriors, Kale said, her voice carrying a weight that commanded respect. The group of Vulpine bowed their heads slightly. Acknowledging her, one of the Vulpine, a tall female with pale blue fur and dark markings along her face, stepped forward. She had a sharp, intelligent gaze, her presence undeniable. Kale spoke with her briefly in their native tongue, and when the conversation ended, the female turned to Liam. This is Thalra, Kale introduced her, her voice firm yet respectful. She is here to test your strength, to see if you can truly understand the power of the Vulpine roar. Liam's heart skipped a beat. Thalra was a leader, one of the Vulpine's most respected warriors. This wasn't just a simple test. This was a challenge, and it meant more than Kale had let on. What kind of test? Liam asked, his voice cautious. He didn't want to show fear, but the realization that he was about to face a trial by combat with one of the Vulpine's best warriors was overwhelming. Kale's expression softened slightly. A test of spirit. The roar is not just a display. It is a bond. If you can show that you understand it, then you'll have taken the first step toward peace. Liam took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about something bigger. Something more personal. He was no longer just fighting an enemy. He was fighting for a chance at something he'd never even considered. Peace. The Vulpine warriors moved into position, and Kale nodded to Liam. He stood tall, adjusting his grip on his rifle, ready to face whatever was coming next. And as the jungle's heavy rain fell all around them, Liam realized that this was no longer just about surviving the war. It was about understanding what it meant to truly connect, what it meant to roar in unison. Liam stood motionless, watching Thalra, the tall Vulpine warrior, as she moved into position. The rain had intensified, the droplets now pounding against his armor, making everything feel heavier. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, and the distant rumble of thunder. This was not just a test of strength, it was something more, something deeper. Liam could feel it in the pit of his stomach. Kale stood nearby, her expression unreadable, but her eyes followed every movement, every gesture. She had said the roar was about connection, but this moment, facing one of the Vulpine's fiercest warriors, was anything but peaceful. Thalra's amber eyes locked onto Liam's. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her stance alone made her intentions clear. The roar wasn't just about showing power, it was about something far more intimate. It was about connecting on a level that transcended enemies and allies. Liam adjusted his rifle. Though he knew it wasn't going to help him here, he wasn't facing her with weapons. He was facing her with himself. And that made it feel even more dangerous. The other Vulpine warriors, standing off to the side, watched silently. This was a test for them too. The outcome would show if a human could ever truly understand the power of the Vulpine. If they could communicate without violence, without destruction. Thalra let out a low growl, and for the first time, Liam noticed the power behind it. It wasn't the roar of a beast, it was controlled, calculated. It was her way of challenging him. He could feel the pressure building, the need to respond, to prove himself. The fear he'd been suppressing all this time bubbled up, fear of failure. Fear of being seen as weak. Kale's voice broke through his thoughts. "Roar, Sergeant. Show us you understand." Liam's throat went dry. Could he do it? Could he let go of everything he'd learned as a soldier and embrace something entirely different? The pressure was mounting. He had always been the one to lead his team into battle, to face down enemies with weapons and tactics. But this was different. This wasn't a fight for survival. This was a fight for connection, for understanding. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath. He thought of everything that had led him here. The war, the endless conflict, the bloodshed. The roar, Kale had said, was not just about strength. It was about the spirit of the Vulpine. It was about showing that the fight wasn't always about conquering. It was about being heard. About sharing what lay deep inside. Without thinking, Liam lifted his head to the sky and let out a roar. It wasn't as strong as the one he had made before, but it came from somewhere deep within him. It felt raw, almost primal, but it wasn't just a release, it was a declaration. He wasn't just trying to match the power of the Vulpine. He was showing something else. Something more human. The roar reverberated through the jungle, echoing off the trees and the rocks, a low, resonating sound that seemed to carry the weight of everything he'd felt during the war. The roar faded slowly, but the silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Liam's heart pounded as he turned to face Thalra. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that made him pause. Had he succeeded? Had he truly understood what she had wanted to teach him? For a long moment, Thalra didn't speak. She simply stood there, watching him. Then, her lips curled into a small smile, the faintest hint of approval in her eyes. "You are not like other humans," she said, her voice deep but not unkind. "You have the strength to roar, but more importantly, you have the heart to listen." Liam felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but it was replaced by something new, a sense of understanding, of unity that he had never experienced before. This wasn't about conquering the Vulpine. It wasn't about winning a war. It was about sharing something bigger than any of them had imagined. Kale stepped forward, her eyes bright with something that resembled hope. "The roar is not just a weapon, Liam, it's a bridge. A bridge to understanding." Liam looked at her, still processing what she meant. He had come to this planet with only one goal: to fight the Vulpine, to protect humanity. But now everything was changing. He wasn't just facing an enemy. He was facing a species that had its own struggles, its own needs, and its own way of surviving. And somehow, his roar had bridged that gap, if only just a little. The rain began to slow, the tension in the air lifting as the storm seemed to pass. Thalra's gaze softened, and she stepped back. "You have much to learn, but you are on the right path. This war does not need to end in destruction. There is another way." Liam's mind was racing. He had always been taught that wars were about winning, about defeating the enemy at all costs. But now he was starting to see things differently. He had connected with the Vulpine in a way that he had never imagined. He had roared with them, shared something that wasn't just about survival, it was about understanding each other's pain, fears, and strength. That this war, this conflict could end. But the question was, would humanity be able to see beyond its fear? Would they be able to listen and learn as he had? Liam took a deep breath, still processing everything. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time he felt like there was a chance for something more than just fighting. The days that followed felt strange to Liam. He had returned to his unit with a head full of thoughts, and for the first time since arriving on Vel 7, He questioned everything he had known about the Vulpine. The roar, the connection, and Kale's. Words kept echoing in his mind. The battle, the war, seemed to fade into the background as he tried to make sense of the possibility of peace. But could he truly believe in it? His team didn't know what had happened during his training session. They knew he had come back a little different, less hardened, more thoughtful. But they didn't understand why. To them, the Vulpine were still the enemy. There was no room for peace in a war like this, or so they thought. Liam. Kyle's voice snapped him back to the present as he stood watching the horizon. Come on, we've got reports coming in about a Vulpine raid on the northern base. Liam's heart raced as he turned to face his friend. He had known this moment would come. The Vulpine were not going to just sit back and let humans take control of the situation. The war was far from over, and as much as he wished otherwise, it was his duty to fight. But something inside of him had changed. The roar, the connection, it was like a seed planted deep in his chest, growing with every passing day. He could still hear Kale's words in his mind. This war doesn't need to end in destruction. Liam clenched his jaw. He couldn't let go of the lessons he had learned, but at the same time, he couldn't afford to forget the reality they were in. The Vulpine weren't going to stop just because he had learned something about their culture. They would continue their raids. They would continue the war. The question was, what part would he play in it? Let's move, Liam said to his team, his voice sharp. We're not backing down. As they made their way to the northern base, Liam couldn't shake the feeling of unease growing in his stomach. The Vulpine were fierce fighters, but this raid was different. He had seen the patterns of their attacks before, fast, violent, and relentless. But the Vulpine were smart. They were learning from their mistakes, adapting quickly to the human strategies. The battle was evolving, and Liam couldn't help but wonder if he was meant to be a part of that evolution. When they arrived at the northern base, the situation was already chaotic. Soldiers scrambled to reinforce the perimeter, their faces a mix of fear and determination. The Vulpine had launched their attack with precision. They weren't just raiding, they were testing their limits, pushing the humans back further than ever before. Liam's heart pounded as he surveyed the scene. There was no time to waste. He barked orders, rallying his team to take their positions. As they moved into place, he saw a familiar figure among the Vulpine soldiers, the tall, fierce warrior he had trained with Kale. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield. There was no sign of animosity in her gaze, no anger or hatred. Only understanding. She knew what this was, just another fight in a long war. But for him, it was something else. She was an ally now, not an enemy. Yet here they were, facing each other across a battlefield. Liam swallowed hard. He had to focus. He couldn't afford to lose sight of the bigger picture. He was a soldier first, and right now his duty was clear. Protect humanity, stop the Vulpine. Advance, and survive. As the first shots were fired, the ground shook beneath them. The Vulpine were relentless, charging forward with their advanced weapons and deadly precision. Liam's team fired back, trying to hold their ground. But the Vulpine were everywhere. Their speed and agility made them nearly impossible to track. Liam fired his rifle, but his mind was elsewhere, wandering to the idea of peace that Kale had shown him. Was it really possible? Could there ever be a world where humans and Vulpine lived in harmony? The roar was supposed to be the beginning of something, but in the heat of battle, it felt impossible. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the air as the Vulpine pushed harder. It felt like the walls of the northern base would break at any moment. Liam fought back with everything he had. But the Vulpine weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something bigger. They had something to prove amidst the chaos. Liam caught sight of Kale once more, leading a group of Vulpine soldiers through the firestorm. She was no longer just an enemy, she was something else. Something that challenged everything he had. known about war, about fighting, about survival. For the briefest moment, their eyes locked again. And in that moment, Liam realized something he hadn't fully understood before. The Vulpine weren't just enemies. They were warriors just like him. They were fighting for survival in a world that had been shaped by centuries of struggle. As the battle raged on, Liam made a choice. He couldn't ignore the roar, couldn't ignore the connection he had felt. But he also couldn't turn his back on the reality of the fight. He had a duty to protect humanity. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The battle raged on with no sign of slowing. The Vulpine soldiers, led by Kale, had pushed the human defenses to their breaking point. The northern base was barely holding. Every inch of ground was contested, and the humans were losing precious territory. But amid the chaos, Liam's mind remained clouded with doubt. How could he fight against Kale, against the very essence of what she had taught him? He'd heard her words echoing in his mind. The roar is a bridge to understanding. Was this truly just another fight? Was this the end of something, or the beginning of a different way forward? Liam snapped back to reality as an explosion rocked the eastern wall of the base. The ground trembled beneath his boots, and the screams of soldiers filled the air. His team was still holding their position, but for how much longer? The Vulpine were relentless, their movements more organized than ever. He scanned the battlefield, his heart racing. He caught sight of Kale once again, moving through the chaos like a force of nature. There was no fear in her eyes, only purpose. She was a warrior, a leader, and in that moment, she wasn't just an enemy, she was something else. Something. He didn't know how to fight. Liam's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his second-in-command. Kyle, coming through his comms. Liam, we've got incoming. Vulpine reinforcements are heading our way. We need to fall back. Liam's breath caught in his throat. The battle was slipping out of their control. He could already hear the heavy footsteps of the Vulpine warriors approaching. They were more than just fighters. They were strategists, and their tactics were evolving with each encounter. Not yet, Liam said, his voice firm, though the uncertainty lingered in his mind. Hold your position. We can't give them the victory so easily. As the roar of another explosion shook the base, Liam turned to face his soldiers. They were exhausted, but there was a fire in their eyes. They had fought bravely, but it was clear that the Vulpine were no longer just invaders. They were a force to be reckoned with. The tide of the battle was shifting, and it wasn't in their favor. In the midst of the battle, Liam saw a small group of Vulpine soldiers break through the line. They weren't charging, they were moving deliberately, almost as if they were trying to capture something. Liam's gut twisted. What were they after? Before he could react, a loud roar echoed through the jungle. It wasn't the deep, terrifying sound of the Vulpine beast, but something more human. Liam spun around to see Kale standing on the front line, her back straight, and her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her expression was intense, but there was no aggression in her stance. It was as if she was trying to communicate something other than violence. Liam's mind raced. Was she trying to tell him something? Was this her way of ending the battle? The roar had always been a symbol of power, but now it seemed to carry a deeper meaning. Was it a call for peace? Or was it just another battle cry? He hesitated, his rifle still gripped tightly in his hands. He knew what he had to do. He was a soldier trained to fight, to win, and to protect humanity at all costs. But could he ignore the possibility of peace? The possibility that the roar could be more than just a weapon? As Kale's gaze met his across the battlefield, something in Liam shifted. The battlefield around them faded into the background, and, for a brief moment, all he could see was Kale's expression, expectant, but calm. She was waiting for him to make a choice. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The war had never been simple, but it had always been about survival. Now though, there was another path, one that led away from the violence. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about finding a way to coexist, to end the cycle of violence. The Vulpine had shown him something he didn't want to admit. Their strength wasn't just in their bodies, but in their ability to understand and communicate. They weren't just a threat. They were a species with their own way of life, their own needs and desires. Liam felt a pang in his chest. His duty was clear. He had to fight. But was it too late to consider peace? "Liam, what's the plan?" Kyle's voice cut through his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. Liam's mind raced as he processed the situation. The humans had fought hard, but the Vulpine were playing a different game now. They were evolving, learning to connect, to understand. "I don't know," Liam said, his voice quiet but full of determination. "But I think it's time we learn from them." He took a deep breath, stepping forward, his rifle still in hand. But his thoughts no longer entirely focused on the fight. It wasn't over yet, but he wasn't sure what the next move would be. Peace or war, the choice was his. But no matter what happened next, Liam knew one thing for certain. Things had already changed. The war between humans and Vulpine was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding. And Liam was ready to listen. The battlefield was still a chaotic blur of gunfire, explosions, and the shouts of soldiers, but Liam's mind had never been clearer. The roar he had unleashed, the lessons from Kale, and the strange bond that was forming between them all seemed to converge in this moment. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing: this war could not continue. It was time to take a stand, not just with weapons, but with words, with understanding. Liam stood at the front line, his rifle lowered but ready. The sound of distant gunfire still echoed in the air, but it was quieter now, almost distant. His team was still fighting, still holding their ground, but something had shifted in him. The battle around him no longer felt like something he had to win at all costs. He didn't know how it would end, but there was a new sense of purpose inside him. Kale had been waiting for this moment too. The Vulpine warriors were strong, and they had shown him their power, their ability to fight, and their will to survive. But Kale had also shown him something else: their vulnerability, their hopes for peace. In a way, they had been fighting for the same thing the humans had: survival. The difference was that they understood that survival didn't have to mean destruction. Liam's gaze shifted back to Kale. She was standing in the middle of the battlefield, calm and unshaken as chaos swirled around them. The other Vulpine warriors paused for a moment, looking to her, waiting for her command. And then, just as she had done before, Kale lifted her head, letting out a mighty roar, the kind that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Liam felt it again: connection, a shared energy. The roar was more than just a weapon or a call to battle. It was a declaration of intent, a message that transcended violence. It was a challenge, yes, but it was also an invitation. For the first time, Liam understood what Kale had meant. The roar wasn't just about fighting. It was about opening the door to something new. And now, it was his turn to decide what came next. He raised his hand, signaling for his soldiers to stop firing. His team hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he was doing, but then they saw him. They saw him standing there, facing Kale, and the Vulpine warriors, not with anger in his eyes, but with resolve. "Hold fire," Liam ordered. The sound of the battle slowed, the constant barrage of gunshots and explosions fading as the soldiers took a step back, their confusion apparent. The Vulpine, too, seemed to pause, their eyes shifting between Kale and Liam, waiting for what would happen next. Liam's heart was pounding, but he held his ground. His mind raced as he searched for the right words to say, words that could bridge the gap between the two species, words that could end the violence and make a new beginning possible. But what could he say? What could he offer that would make them listen? "I'm tired of fighting," Liam said. his voice steady but filled with the weight of everything he had seen. I don't want to see anyone else die. Not us, not you. This war, it's pointless. There's got to be a way out. We don't have to keep doing this. We can't keep doing this. Kale stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She had seen humans fight, seen them destroy, but she had never seen one of them offer peace. She had never seen one of them speak from the heart. The silence hung in the air as both sides waited, as if the entire world had paused to hear the outcome of this fragile moment. Liam glanced at his soldiers, and then at the Vulpine. They were waiting for him to make a choice. The Vulpine had shown him their strength, their power, but now it was his turn to show them something else. Something bigger. Kale spoke, her voice calm yet filled with determination. The Vulpine have never been the invaders you think we are. We fight to survive, just as you do. But there is another way. A way that does not need to end in death and destruction. If you're willing to listen, we will show you. But you must trust us. Liam took a deep breath. The decision wasn't an easy one. It wasn't about forgetting everything that had happened, everything they had lost. It was about finding a way to stop it from continuing. He had learned enough from the Vulpine to know that they were not the mindless monsters the stories had told. They were survivors just like humanity. I trust you, Liam said, his voice firm. We can stop this. At his words, a quiet murmur rippled through the Vulpine ranks. Kale's expression softened, and for the first time, Liam saw something. In her eyes that he hadn't seen before, a glimmer of hope. She nodded slowly. Then it begins. Liam turned to his soldiers. Lower your weapons. We're not fighting anymore. There was a moment of hesitation, but as they looked to him, as they saw the change in his eyes, they began to lower their rifles one by one. The tension in the air began to lift, replaced by something else, something fragile, but real. The battle had ended. Not with a victory or defeat, but with the possibility of something greater. Liam had taken the first step toward peace, and in that moment, he knew that this war could end. Not through more fighting, but through understanding. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it was a start. Kale stepped closer, her expression more open than before. There is much to learn, much to do, but we can do it together. Liam nodded, his heart still racing, but now with a sense of purpose. The war wasn't over, but this moment, this fragile step toward peace, was enough. They had started something that could change everything.